The emergency alarm echoed through the vast halls of Harmony Station like a dying whale's call. Alien diplomats rushed through corridors that stretched for miles, their various breathing apparatus clicking and whirring as they moved. Some floated in gravity-defying bubbles, while others crawled along the walls with sticky appendages. The station had been built to accommodate every known species in the galaxy, but today it felt more like a refugee camp than a diplomatic center. Ambassador. Neth adjusted his crystalline form as he entered the main council chamber. His species had evolved on a world of singing crystals and gentle breezes, where conflict meant harsh words at most. The Quarian had never understood war, which made their current panic all the more unsettling. Around him, dozens of other species took their places in specially designed environmental pods. The air shimmered with different atmospheric mixtures as each delegation settled into their protective barriers. The Pelosians slithered into their low-gravity chambers, their slug-like bodies leaving trails of bioluminescent slime that served as their written language. The insectoid hive minds buzzed in perfect unison while the aquatic merfolk filled their water tanks with nervous splashing. Every species present had one thing in common. They all looked terrified. The emergency session will now begin, announced the chamber's artificial intelligence in a voice that somehow managed to translate perfectly into each species' native language. The technology had been a gift from the humans decades ago, along with countless other innovations that had become essential to galactic civilization. War Prime Kos of the hegemony sat motionless in his reinforced chair. His species stood 8 feet tall with 4 powerful arms and compound eyes that could track multiple targets simultaneously. They had conquered 17 star systems through superior military might and had never encountered a foe they couldn't overwhelm with brute force. Yet something in his posture suggested unease as he watched the other delegates panic around him. "The humans are gone," Neth said, his crystal voice chiming like broken bells. "All of them. Every trade vessel, every research station, every diplomatic mission. They've abandoned us completely." A chorus of alien sounds filled the chamber as species after species confirmed similar reports. The Verdani, peaceful plant-like beings who had relied on human agricultural technology, spoke of withering crops and failing ecosystems. The deep space miners from the asteroid belts reported that their equipment was breaking down without human maintenance crews. Medical centers across the galaxy were closing emergency wards as human trauma surgeons disappeared overnight. They left no explanation, wheezed a gas-breathing delegate through his atmospheric suit. "Our hospital on Titan Base had 17 human doctors yesterday. This morning we found only resignation letters and empty quarters. 3 of our patients died during surgery because no one else knew how to operate the medical equipment, the BI." Weight of the situation began to settle over the chamber like a funeral shroud. For over a century, humans had quietly woven themselves into the fabric of galactic society. They had appeared as traders first, offering goods that could withstand the harshest environments. Their tools never broke, their medicines worked on any species, and their engineers could fix anything. When conflicts arose between species human, diplomats somehow always found solutions that satisfied everyone, but they had never demanded territory or resources in return. They had seemed content to help others while asking for little more than friendship and knowledge in exchange. Many species had come to view them as harmless, even primitive compared to the advanced civilizations that ruled the galaxy. Their homeworld was a backwater planet in an unremarkable solar system, and their technology appeared crude compared to the elegant solutions developed by more sophisticated races. The hegemony expansion into the outer rim proceeded as planned. Kos finally spoke, his voice carrying the authority of a species that had never known defeat. "The human research station that violated our territorial boundaries has been neutralized. 43 casualties were deemed acceptable losses for the greater good of galactic order." The chamber fell silent. Even the constant background hum of life support systems seemed to pause as the implications of his words sank in. Research Station Delta 7 had been studying stellar phenomena in what the hegemony claimed as their expansion zone. The humans had filed proper surveys and received approval from the Galactic Council, but the hegemony had decided that their military expansion took precedence over scientific research. The attack had been swift and brutal. Hegemony forces had given no warning before opening fire on the defenseless research station. 43 human scientists, doctors, and engineers had died while conducting peaceful research that could have benefited every species in the galaxy. The humans had filed no complaints, made no demands for justice, and issued no threats of retaliation. They had simply begun going home. "You fool," whispered a delegate from the peaceful Spiral Federation. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Dr. Yin, whose species had evolved on a low-gravity world where violence was physically impossible, began to shake uncontrollably. "The trauma surgeons at our children's hospital were all human. We don't know how to perform emergency surgery on our own young without their techniques. They developed procedures that work on any species because they came from a world where everything was constantly trying to kill them. The truth that no one wanted to acknowledge hung in the air like poison gas. Humans had earned their reputation as healers and builders not despite coming from a dangerous world, but because of it. Their planet had forged them into the ultimate survivors, beings who could thrive in any environment and solve any problem. They had shared these gifts freely with the galaxy, asking nothing in return except the chance to explore and learn. Now they were gone, and the delicate ecosystem of galactic civilization was already beginning to collapse without them. Supply chains that had functioned perfectly for decades were breaking down. Medical procedures that had saved millions of lives were becoming impossible to perform. Diplomatic solutions that had prevented countless wars were no longer available. The chamber erupted into chaos as delegates began shouting in dozens of languages. Some demanded immediate action to bring the humans back. Others called for military intervention to force their return. A few suggested that the galaxy was better off without the primitive Deathworlders and their disturbing competence at survival. But War Prime Koss remained silent, his compound eyes fixed on the tactical display that showed human ships disappearing from sensors across the galaxy. For the first time in his species' history, he was beginning to understand what it meant to be afraid of prey that had decided to stop running. The humans were going home, and the galaxy was about to remember why sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones that choose to be peaceful. The last transport ship lifted off from New Geneva's spaceport as the sun set behind the towering crystal spires of Earth's capital city. Dr. Mills watched from her office window as the vessel disappeared into the darkening sky, carrying with it the final group of human doctors who had been working in the Andromeda sector. The sight should have felt triumphant. Humanity was finally coming home after a century of serving others across the galaxy. But instead it felt like watching a funeral. Tom burst into her office without knocking, his face flushed from running through the corridors of the Terran Institute. His grandfather had been one of the first humans to make contact with alien species, and his family had spent 3 generations building relationships with peaceful races like the Verdani. Now he was helping to coordinate the largest evacuation in human history. "The final numbers are in," he said, trying to catch his breath. 97.3% evacuation complete. The only humans remaining in alien space are those who chose to stay despite direct orders to return home. Mills nodded grimly as she reviewed the reports flowing across her desk. Every human colony, research station, medical facility, and trading post was being systematically abandoned. The evacuation had been planned in complete secrecy over the past 3 months, ever since news of the research station Delta 7 massacre had reached Earth. No alien government had been informed, no explanations had been offered, and no exceptions had been made. "What about the medical corps?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would be devastating. "Gone. Every trauma surgeon, every emergency response team, Every field medic? Tom's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. The Gexi are begging us to reconsider. Their atmospheric engineering project will collapse without our bacterial cultures. Apparently, their entire ecosystem depends on microorganisms that only exist in Earth-like environments. The irony was bitter. The Gexi homeworld had been dying when humans first encountered them 50 years ago. Their atmosphere had been poisoned by industrial accidents, and their entire civilization was slowly suffocating. Human biologists had worked tirelessly to develop bacterial strains that could process the toxins and restore breathable air. The binge project had taken decades of careful work and had saved billions of lives. Now those same bacteria were dying without human maintenance, and the Gexi faced extinction once again. The Spiral Federation is in complete panic, Tom continued, reading from his datapad. Industrial accidents in their manufacturing sectors have increased by 400% since our safety inspectors left. Turns out no other species in the galaxy has developed workplace safety protocols for environments where things can actually kill you. Mills wasn't surprised. Most alien species had evolved on worlds where the greatest danger was running out of food or getting caught in bad weather. They had never needed to develop the paranoid attention to safety that humans took for granted. Human safety inspectors didn't just check for compliance with regulations, they anticipated every possible way that machinery could malfunction and kill someone, because they came from a world where everything was constantly trying to kill them. The reports kept coming in, each one more desperate than the last. The crystalline Quarian had discovered that their mining operations in gas giant atmospheres were grinding to a halt without human-built equipment. No other species had developed materials science advanced enough to create tools that could function in crushing pressures and corrosive atmospheres. The elegant solutions preferred by other civilizations simply dissolved or collapsed under conditions that humans considered routine. The water-breathing merfolk had sent 17 different diplomatic messages in the past week, each one more panicked than the last. Their deep-sea cities had been built using human engineering principles and human-manufactured pressure seals. Without human maintenance crews, the cities were beginning to flood as seals failed and structural supports corroded. The merfolk's own technology, designed for their homeworld's gentle currents and stable temperatures, couldn't handle the extreme conditions of the deep ocean colonies they had built with human help. The requests for emergency assistance are overwhelming our communication systems, Tom said, scrolling through message after message. Every species in the galaxy seems to be discovering exactly how much they relied on human expertise, Mills pulled up a holographic display showing the current state of galactic trade networks. Red warning indicators blinked across dozens of star systems as supply chains collapsed and critical infrastructure failed. The humans hadn't just been traders and doctors, they had become the invisible support network that kept galactic civilization functioning. "What about the military contracts?" she asked. Tom's expression darkened. "The hegemony has been trying to contact our mercenary companies for the past month. Apparently, their occupation forces are having trouble maintaining order on conquered worlds. The local populations are using tactics that their military has never encountered before." The news didn't surprise Mills. Human military advisors had been quietly sharing knowledge with species across the galaxy for decades, ostensibly to help them defend against pirates and raiders. But humans had also developed extensive databases on every known species' psychology, sociology, and military capabilities. They had studied galactic politics with the same obsessive attention to detail that had helped them survive on Earth. Now that knowledge was being put to use in ways that human advisors had never intended. Conquered populations were discovering the art of guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, and asymmetric combat, all techniques that humans had developed during their own violent history. "The Verdani are requesting immediate agricultural assistance," Tom continued. "Their crops are failing without human-designed growing systems. Turns out our hydroponic technology was specifically engineered to work in hostile environments where normal farming is impossible." Mills closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. The Verdani were among the most peaceful species in the galaxy, plant-like beings who had never known conflict. They had embraced human agricultural technology because it allowed them to grow food in previously uninhabitable regions of their world. Now their expanding population was completely dependent on farming techniques that only humans fully understood. The final transport had disappeared from view, leaving Earth's sky empty except for the familiar constellation of defense satellites that had protected humanity's homeworld for generations. Those satellites were now being reinforced and upgraded with technologies that had been developed in secret during humanity's century of galactic service. "Dr. Mills," Tom said quietly, "are we really going to let them all suffer because of what the hegemony did?" She turned away from the window and looked at the young man who represented everything good about humanity's relationship with the galaxy. His family had genuinely cared about the aliens they had worked with, had formed real friendships and built lasting partnerships. The decision to abandon those relationships was tearing him apart. "Tom," she said gently, 43 researchers died at Delta 7. They were studying stellar formation patterns that could have helped every species in the galaxy understand how their solar systems developed. They were killed for the crime of being human in the wrong place at the wrong time. She pulled up the personnel files of the dead researchers, doctors, engineers, physicists, and biologists who had chosen to leave Earth's safety to help others understand the universe. Each one had been a volunteer who could have lived comfortably on humanity's homeworld, but had instead chosen to risk their lives for the sake of knowledge. The galaxy had a choice, Mills continued. They could have demanded justice for those murders. They could have imposed sanctions on the hegemony, or at least condemned their actions. Instead, they remained silent because the hegemony is powerful and humans are just helpful primitives from a backwater world. Tom nodded reluctantly. The galactic response to the Delta 7 massacre had been exactly what humanity had expected. Nothing at all. A few species had offered private condolences, but no one had been willing to risk their relationship with the hegemony over the deaths of 43 humans. "So we're going home," Mills said, "and the galaxy is going to learn exactly how much. They relied on those helpful primitives. Maybe next time they'll think twice before letting someone murder our people without consequences." Outside the window, Earth's defense grid powered up for the first time in decades as humanity prepared to remind the galaxy why evolution had made them the apex predator of the most dangerous world anyone had ever discovered. The first cascade failure began on Verdus, a lush garden world that had become the newest jewel in the hegemony's expanding empire. Commander Voss stood in the Planetary Operations Center watching his tactical displays flicker with alerts he had never seen before. Red warning symbols blinked across the holographic map as his occupation forces reported contact with enemy units that shouldn't exist. The native Verdani were herbivorous creatures who resembled walking trees. Peaceful, beings who had never developed weapons more sophisticated than farming tools. Their surrender had been immediate and complete when hegemony forces arrived 6 months ago. They had offered no resistance, filed no complaints, and seemed resigned to their fate as subjects of a superior military power. Now they were fighting, back with tactics that defied everything Voss knew about warfare. "Sir, Patrol Unit 7 has gone silent," his communications officer reported, the insectoid creature's mandibles clicking nervously. Their last transmission indicated they were investigating suspicious activity in the agricultural district. That was 4 hours ago. Voss pulled up the patrol route on his display. The missing unit had been conducting a routine inspection of food distribution centers when they had simply vanished. No distress signals, no sounds of combat, no energy. Weapon discharges detected by orbital sensors. 12 trained hegemony soldiers had disappeared as if they had never existed. "Deploy Search Unit 3 to investigate," he ordered. But even as he spoke, he knew it was probably a mistake. 2 other search teams had gone missing over the past week while looking for previous patrol units. The pattern was becoming disturbingly clear. His forces were being systematically hunted by enemies they couldn't see or track. The door to the operations center burst open as Lieutenant Zack stumbled inside, his armor scorched and his weapon missing. The young officer's compound eyes were wide with something approaching panic as he tried to report what had happened to his squad. "They came from everywhere at once," he gasped. "Underground tunnels, building rooftops, even from inside structures. We had already cleared. They used our own defensive positions against us, sir. Somehow they knew exactly where we would take cover and had prepared countermeasures for every tactical response." Voss felt his blood temperature drop as the implications sank in. "The Verdani don't have military training. They're farmers and philosophers. How could they possibly anticipate hegemony battle tactics?" Zack reached into his damaged armor and pulled out a small data pad that had been deliberately left behind by his attackers. The device was of human manufacture, its simple design and rugged construction immediately recognizable. When activated, it displayed tactical manuals that had been translated into the Verdani's written language. "Urban warfare for occupied populations." Voss read aloud, scrolling through detailed instructions on guerrilla tactics, psychological operations, and asymmetric combat. "Resistance planning for non-military species. How to fight a superior enemy using environmental advantages." The manuals were comprehensive and sophisticated, covering everything from improvised explosive devices to communication security to recruitment and cell structure. They had been written by beings who understood both the psychology of occupation forces and the desperation of conquered peoples. More disturbing still, they contained detailed analysis of hegemony military doctrine and specific countermeasures for every standard tactical response. "The humans," Voss whispered. "They left these behind deliberately." Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out as the true scope of humanity's withdrawal became apparent. On the mining station, Kepler Industrial, the Confederation of Rings watched helplessly as their asteroid processing equipment ground to a halt. The massive machines had been built by human engineers to withstand the crushing vacuum of space and the constant bombardment of cosmic radiation, but they required maintenance techniques that no other species had mastered. Chief Engineer Rotax, whose species had evolved in the gas clouds of nebulae, floated helplessly before a control panel covered in human warning labels. His people had developed beautiful, elegant technologies that worked perfectly in their native environment, but they had never needed to build anything that could survive the harsh realities of industrial space operations. "The primary extraction unit has seized completely," he reported to the station commander through their communication implants. "The human maintenance manuals require tools and techniques that we don't possess. Our own engineering solutions simply melt or shatter under the operating conditions these machines were designed for." The station's entire economy depended on processing rare metals from asteroids using equipment that only humans knew how to maintain. Without those metals, dozens of species would lose access to the advanced materials they needed for everything, from medical devices to space travel. The elegant, sophisticated technologies that other species preferred simply couldn't handle the brutal conditions of asteroid mining. Meanwhile, on the aquatic world of Oceanus Prime, the merfolk faced a different but equally desperate crisis. Their beautiful underwater cities had been built in the deepest trenches of their world's oceans using human engineering principles and human-manufactured pressure seals. The construction had been an engineering marvel, allowing the merfolk to expand their civilization into previously uninhabitable regions. Now those cities were dying as critical systems failed without human maintenance. Elder Coral floated in the central command chamber of Depth City as emergency alarms echoed through the water around her. The pressure seals that kept the crushing depths from collapsing their habitats were failing one by one, and her people lacked the knowledge to repair them. The humans designed these systems to operate in conditions that would instantly kill most species, she explained to her council of advisors. Our own technology is perfectly adapted for the gentle currents and stable temperatures of our traditional territories, but it cannot handle the extreme pressures and corrosive minerals found in the deep trenches. The irony was becoming clear across the galaxy. Every species had developed sophisticated technologies perfectly suited to their own worlds and needs. The crystalline Quarian had created beautiful energy matrices that worked flawlessly in their homeworld's harmonic resonance fields. The gas-breathing Netherians had built graceful atmospheric processors that could purify any gaseous environment. The plant-like Verdani had developed living buildings that grew stronger over time in their world's perfect climate. But none of these elegant solutions could handle the harsh realities that humans considered routine. Human technology was crude and inelegant by galactic standards, but it worked everywhere under any conditions because it had been designed by beings who lived on a world where everything was actively trying to kill them. The medical crisis was perhaps the most devastating of all. In the prestigious Galactic Medical Center on Sanctuary Station, Chief Physician Healer Zen watched helplessly as patients died from injuries that should have been easily treatable. The Zen species had developed the most advanced medical knowledge in the galaxy, able to cure diseases and repair genetic damage with precision that bordered on miraculous. But they had never learned trauma surgery because their homeworld had. No dangerous predators, no natural disasters, and no accidents that could cause massive physical damage. When other species suffered catastrophic injuries, they brought them to human doctors who had spent millennia learning how to keep bodies functioning through unimaginable trauma. The patient has multiple organ failure, massive blood loss, and severe neural damage, Zen reported to his surgical team. According to human medical protocols, these injuries are survivable with immediate intervention, but we lack the knowledge and techniques to perform the required procedures. The human surgical manuals described techniques that seemed barbaric to other species, cutting open living bodies, directly manipulating organs, and forcing damaged systems to continue functioning through pure mechanical intervention. It was crude, violent medicine that other species found disturbing, but it saved lives that no other medical tradition could preserve. As reports flooded in from across the galaxy, the scope of the crisis became impossible to ignore. Humanity hadn't just been helpful neighbors, they had become the indispensable foundation that allowed galactic civilization to function. Their crude, violent, paranoid approach to every problem had created solutions that worked when elegant. Alternatives failed. And now they were gone, leaving behind a galaxy that was discovering exactly how much it had depended on the Deathworlders who had chosen peace despite being forged by endless war. In the depths of space, human ships moved through hyperspace toward their home system, carrying with them the accumulated knowledge of a century spent studying every species, every government, and every weakness in the galaxy. They had learned much during their time among the stars, and soon that knowledge would be put to use in ways that the galaxy was not prepared to face. War Prime Kos had conquered 17 star systems and subjugated 43 different species during his rise to power, but he had never faced anything like the reports flooding his command center. The mighty hegemony military machine was being systematically dismantled by enemies that seemed to understand their every weakness while remaining completely invisible to conventional detection methods. The rebellion on Verdus had spread like a plague across 9 occupied worlds in just 6 months. What had started as scattered acts of sabotage by peaceful herbivores had evolved into a coordinated campaign of asymmetric warfare that was bleeding his forces dry. Every day brought new reports of missing patrols, destroyed supply convoys, and communication networks compromised by infiltrators who struck without warning and vanished like ghosts. The insurgents are using something called deep strike tactics, his intelligence chief reported, the creature's natural camouflage shifting colors to reflect his nervous state. They identify critical infrastructure nodes and attack multiple targets simultaneously to create cascading system failures. Our analysts believe these techniques were developed by species that regularly faced overwhelming odds against superior forces. Kos studied the tactical display, showing the current state of hegemony operations across their occupied territories. Red zones marked areas where his forces had lost effective control, yellow indicated contested regions, and green showed secure zones. 3 months ago, the entire map had been green. Now red zones were spreading like an infection across every conquered world. "Show me the latest intelligence on their weapons and equipment," he commanded. The holographic display shifted to show captured enemy materials, improvised explosive devices built from common industrial supplies, communication equipment that couldn't be jammed or intercepted, portable shield generators that could protect small groups from heavy weapons fire, medical kits that could treat any species and keep severely wounded fighters operational. But most disturbing of all were the tactical manuals that kept appearing in the hands of insurgent forces. Detailed guides to guerrilla warfare, urban combat, psychological operations, and resistance organization. The manuals were written with intimate knowledge of hegemony military doctrine and contained specific countermeasures for every standard tactical response. "These came from the humans," Koss said, though speaking the words aloud made his situation feel even more hopeless. "They've been preparing for this moment for decades." The realization was like being struck by plasma fire. Humanity hadn't just been running trade routes and medical missions for the past century. They had been quietly documenting every species' strengths and weaknesses, every government's pressure points, every military's blind spots. Not out of malice, but out of the ingrained survival instinct of a species that had evolved as both predator and prey on the galaxy's most dangerous world. The humans had been preparing for war without even realizing it, and now their preparations were being used against the species foolish enough to attack them. A priority alert flashed across the command. Center's main display as long-range sensors detected something that made Koss's 4 hearts skip beats simultaneously. Ships were approaching the outer edge of hegemony space, not the familiar merchant vessels or research craft that had been common sights for generations, but something entirely new. The vessels had clean, predatory lines that spoke of pure military function. Their energy signatures were unlike anything in the galactic database, suggesting technologies that had been developed in complete secrecy. Most disturbing of all, they moved with the coordinated precision of a military formation that had trained together for years. "Analysis?" Koss demanded, though he was already dreading the answer. "The ships appeared to be of human construction," his sensor officer reported, compound eyes reflecting the fear that was spreading through the command center, like poison. However, their design philosophy is completely different from previous human vessels. These ships were built for combat, not exploration or trade. The tactical implications were staggering. Humanity had spent a century appearing to be peaceful. Traders and researchers, while secretly developing military technologies that no other species had even suspected. They had studied galactic civilization from within, learning every weakness and vulnerability while presenting themselves as harmless primitives from a backwater world. The communication system crackled to life with an incoming transmission on all frequencies simultaneously. The message was broadcast in perfect translation for every species in the galaxy, suggesting communication technology far more advanced than humanity had ever revealed. "This is Admiral Stone of the Terran Defense Fleet," the voice said, and something in its tone activated evolutionary alarm systems across dozens of different species. "For the past year, we have observed the galaxy's response to our peaceful withdrawal. We have noted which governments respected our departure and which attempted to follow us home." Koss felt his blood temperature drop as the implications became clear. The humans hadn't just been withdrawing from galactic society. They had been watching to see how different species would react to their absence. They had been conducting a galaxy-wide intelligence operation to identify potential threats and allies. "We have watched as our former allies struggle with challenges they never learned to handle themselves," the transmission continued, "and as aggressive species reveal their true nature without human mediation to protect their victims." The chamber fell silent except for the background hum of life support systems. every officer present understood that they were listening to a predator species that had finally decided to stop pretending to be prey. To those who harmed our people at Research Station Delta 7, and to those who thought our absence meant weakness, you are about to learn why evolution made us the dominant predator on a world that tried to kill us every single day. The transmission ended, leaving behind a silence that felt like the moment before a lightning strike. Koss stared at the tactical display showing human ships approaching his territory and realized that everything he thought he knew about humanity had been carefully constructed deception. They weren't primitive traders who had gotten lucky with a few useful technologies. They were apex predators from a death world who had spent a century studying their potential enemies while appearing harmless and helpful. Every human doctor who had saved alien lives had also been learning alien physiology and psychology. Every human engineer who had built infrastructure had also been mapping critical vulnerabilities. Every human diplomat who had negotiated peaceful solutions had also been cataloging government weaknesses and military capabilities. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving surrender demands from 47 different systems simultaneously. The insurgent forces are coordinating their operations across our entire territory." Koss closed his eyes and tried to process the scope of his species' miscalculation. The attack on Research Station Delta 7 had been intended as a simple demonstration of hegemony power, a message to the galaxy that military expansion would not be deterred by the presence of civilian researchers. 43 human deaths had been deemed acceptable losses for the greater good of establishing territorial dominance. Instead, those 43 deaths had triggered the most sophisticated military operation in galactic history. Humanity had revealed that their century of peaceful cooperation had been an extended intelligence-gathering mission conducted by a species that understood warfare at a level that made traditional military thinking obsolete. "War Prime," his aide whispered. "What are your orders?" Koss looked around the command center at officers who had never known defeat. Warriors from a species that had built an empire through superior firepower and tactical excellence. Now they faced enemies who had studied them for generations and had developed countermeasures for every aspect of their military doctrine. "Signal all fleet commanders," he said finally. "Prepare for full defensive operations. And someone find me everything we know about human military capabilities." But even as he gave the orders, Koss knew it was already too late. The humans weren't coming to fight a war by galactic standards. They were coming to demonstrate why sometimes the most dangerous species are the ones that choose to be peaceful, despite being forged by endless conflict. The Deathworlders were coming home, and they were bringing with them the accumulated knowledge of a century spent learning how to destroy every government, military, and species that had been foolish enough to trust them. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their military might. It was their patience and their willingness to plan for threats that might not emerge for generations. They had spent 100 years preparing for this moment, and now that preparation was about to be unleashed on enemies who had mistaken kindness for weakness. The war lasted exactly 72 hours, though most species would argue it wasn't really a war at all, but rather a demonstration of surgical precision that redefined what military power meant in the galactic age. The first sign that something unprecedented was happening came when Hegemony Command Center on their capital world simply stopped working. War Prime Koss was in the middle of coordinating defensive positions when every screen in the facility went dark for 3 seconds, then flickered back to life, displaying a simple message in perfect Hegemony script. "System override authorized. New management protocols active. Please remain calm." His tactical officer frantically worked at his console, trying to regain control of their own systems. "Sir, every piece of human-built technology in our empire is responding to external commands. Our navigation systems, communication networks, life support regulators, even the coffee machines are acknowledging orders from unknown sources." The Scope of the situation became clear as similar reports flooded in from across hegemony space. For over a century, human-built components had been integrated into the infrastructure of every major civilization in the galaxy. Computer processors that never failed, communication relays that worked across any distance, navigation systems that could plot courses through the most dangerous regions of space. The technology had been so reliable and beneficial that no one had questioned its presence in their most critical systems. Now, every device bearing the simple marking Human Engineering Corporation was quietly switching allegiance to its original creators. Koss watched in horrified fascination as his flagship's navigation system cheerfully informed him that it was plotting a new course to Sol system for mandatory surrender processing. When he tried to override the command. The computer politely but firmly explained that his authorization had been revoked, and would he please remain seated while automated systems handled the flight. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his engineering staff, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Every human-built device contains communication and override capabilities that were never documented in the technical specifications, his chief engineer reported. The humans have been able to monitor and control their technology all along. We just never realized it because they never used those capabilities until now. The revelation was staggering. Humanity had spent a century quietly installing backdoors into the technology that ran galactic civilization, not out of malicious intent, but as a basic security precaution that any species from a dangerous world would consider routine. They had simply assumed that other species would be paranoid enough to discover and disable such features. Instead, the galaxy had trustingly integrated human technology into their most sensitive systems without ever conducting proper security analysis. On Virtus, the rebellion received supply drops that seemed to materialize from empty space. Weapons, medical supplies, communication equipment, and food rations appeared exactly where they were needed most, delivered by stealth systems that could penetrate any defensive network. The equipment was sophisticated beyond anything the insurgents had seen, but designed with the user-friendly simplicity that characterized all human engineering. Commander Voss found himself facing enemy forces that had transformed overnight from desperate guerrillas into a professional military organization. The Verdani moved with confidence and precision, using equipment that made his own weapons seem primitive by comparison. Most disturbing of all, they fought with the cold efficiency of beings who had been trained by the galaxy's apex predators. They're not just using human tactics anymore, he reported to anyone who might still be listening. They're using human psychology. They know exactly how we think, how we react to pressure, what fears drive our decision-making processes. It's like fighting an enemy that can read our minds. The truth was even worse than mind reading. Human advisors had spent decades studying every species' behavioral patterns, social structures, and psychological triggers. They had documented how different races responded to stress, what motivated their military forces, and how their command structures could be disrupted. This knowledge had originally been intended to help humans better serve as mediators and diplomats, but now it was being weaponized with devastating effectiveness. The most psychologically disturbing aspect of the human response wasn't their military superiority, but their approach to prisoners and casualties. Hegemony soldiers who were wounded in combat found themselves receiving immediate medical treatment from the same humans who had shot them. They were patched up with ruthless efficiency, then politely questioned while their injuries healed under the care of medical technology that seemed almost magical in its effectiveness. "It's not personal," one human medic explained to a captured hegemony officer while setting his broken arm with a device that accelerated bone healing by weeks. "Your government tried to kill our researchers. We're stopping you from doing it." Again, basic ecosystem management. The phrase spread through hegemony ranks like wildfire, carrying with it a chilling realization about how humanity viewed the conflict. This wasn't a war between equals fighting for territory or resources. This was pest control conducted by apex predators who saw aggressive species as threats to be neutralized for the good of the galactic ecosystem. War Prime Kos found himself aboard his own flagship as it flew through hyperspace towards Sol's system, completely beyond his control but operating with perfect efficiency. The ship's human-built systems had politely informed him that he was now a prisoner of war and would be treated according to Terran Defense Force protocols for captured enemy leadership. The view screen showed Earth growing larger as they approached, a blue and white marble that looked deceptively peaceful from space. Kos had studied humanity's homeworld in preparation for eventual conquest, but the intelligence reports had never conveyed the sheer hostility of the planet's environment. Admiral Stone entered the observation lounge, where Kos waited under. Guard, carrying a datapad and wearing the expression of someone conducting routine business rather than accepting the surrender of a galactic empire. The human was smaller than Kos and looked physically fragile by hegemony standards, but something in his presence made ancient prey instincts activate in species that had forgotten what it meant to be hunted. "War Prime Kos," Stone said politely, "thank you for accepting our invitation to discuss terms. I'd like to show you something that might help explain our perspective on recent events." The wall display activated to show real-time footage of Earth's surface. Category 5. Hurricanes raged across vast oceans, while volcanic eruptions painted the sky red on distant continents. Massive predators stalked through jungles where every plant was toxic and every creature was designed to kill. Ice sheets ground, continents to powder, while desert temperatures reached levels that would kill most galactic species in minutes. "This is where we come from," Stone explained in the same tone he might use to discuss weather patterns. "This is what we call home. Every human you've ever met survived this environment. Their parents survived it. Their children are surviving it right now while attending school and playing games." Kos stared at the display with growing horror as the implications sank in. The helpful traders and doctors he had dismissed as primitive were products of the most hostile environment any species had ever encountered. They had evolved not just to survive on a death world, but to thrive there while maintaining complex civilization and developing technologies that worked under any conditions. "You attacked 43 of our researchers," Stone continued, his voice never changing from its conversational tone. "Researchers who chose to leave this world behind to study the stars and help other species develop their potential. You killed people who had dedicated their lives to making the galaxy a safer and more prosperous place." The Admiral gestured toward the display showing Earth's endless violence. "Our homeworld taught us that the appropriate response to existential threats is immediate and overwhelming retaliation. We could have glassed your capital worlds, sterilized your colonies, and hunted your species to extinction across the galaxy. Instead, we chose restraint." Kos found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What will you do with us?" Stone smiled, and the expression somehow managed to be both genuinely friendly and absolutely terrifying. "We're going to rehabilitate you, human style." The process of rehabilitation turned out to be exactly what any species that had survived on Earth would consider logical and efficient. The hegemony military was systematically dismantled and reorganized into disaster relief and infrastructure development forces. Conquered worlds were liberated and provided with human advisors who taught sustainable development and defensive military doctrine. Former hegemony leadership was assigned to work programs that involved building hospitals, schools, and environmental restoration projects under human supervision. It wasn't punishment in any traditional sense, but rather the kind of practical problem-solving that characterized human approaches to everything. The galaxy had a problem with aggressive expansionist species, so humanity had simply removed their ability to cause harm while redirecting their energy toward constructive purposes. The war had lasted 72 hours, but its effects would reshape galactic civilization for generations. Every species learned that the helpful primitives from Earth were actually apex predators who had chosen peace despite being forged by endless conflict. More importantly, they learned that when beings who understand war choose diplomacy, it's not because they're weak, it's because they know exactly how much devastation they could cause if they chose violence instead. The galaxy had tested humanity's patience and discovered that there were limits to how much peaceful species would tolerate before remembering what their homeworld had taught them about survival. The lesson would be remembered in stories told across the stars for thousands of years, all variations on the same theme. When you attack those who have chosen peace despite being bred for war, you don't face their mercy. You face their competence, and that is a far more frightening prospect than any weapon could ever be.